So I've been doing some work on the base for this pedestal, and I haven't filmed a ton of it. It's a long-term project, and it's coming towards the end of it, and time is of the essence, so I've just kind of been busting it out. And the second reason is because recently someone approached me about showing them some basic woodworking skills, and they made these two shapes pretty much themselves. And so anyway, this was just mahogany left over from the mantle build I did, and simply cut a circle using a router. There's a couple different ways you can cut a circle, and then routed a profile on it, and then cut an equilateral triangle on the table saw, and routed, actually chamfered both edges so you get this nice point to it. These are fairly simple shapes, super easy to make yourself. If you have the skills to make the soccer ball, you can make these. And shapes like this, bases like this, you can actually go buy at Walmart or even Michael's. They won't be mahogany, they'll probably be pine, but you can get them. Then for the soccer ball to sit in, this is a ring of ash. It's actually a little crooked because I had a little bit of a hard time with my hole saws. But this is a 4-inch hole saw, so I drilled out that. And then, well, first I drilled out the center, which is a 3-inch, and then a 4-inch, and you end up with this ring. The soccer ball is going to sit in that, and I don't actually know if I'm using this exact one yet, just because I still have to work out what I'm using to light the ball. And then the whole stand is going to be propped up by these 3 pilasters, and these are actually just from a longer piece of this sort of rotted molding. I just cut them down to size, and now you can see I drew straight lines across my triangle. I'm going to drill holes for these to mount into, and then once I have that, I could drill receiving holes onto this circle, and the whole thing will go together like that. This is upside down. So I used an angle to get those straight lines, and then from the edges I came in about 2.5 inches and marked with the spots. And I have an 1.25 inch hole saw in my drill press, and the stop is set so it only goes about halfway through this piece, so I could drill all these holes, test fit this twisted coil sort of detail, and then mark the circle and cut those as well. And I'm probably just going to keep this dry fitted for now until I figure out how I'm doing all the lighting. So with those holes drilled into the triangle, I could now prop this on the base I have, and I just eyed this off of the edge, the distances. It's going to line up because they're already set in the triangle, so I just made sure that the distance from the pilaster to the edge was about the same all the way around, and then I rough marked all of them with a pencil. Then I took my hole saw out of my table saw, and I set this so the point just barely sits above those teeth so it can align the hole saw so it cuts, but I don't have to worry about it going through the other side of my piece. So now I could take this all apart, and I'm going to line up this and tap it with a hammer in order to get a center point for all of those marks. So this is where I'm at after drilling for those attachments, and like I said, this is just dry fitted, and I don't know if this is going to even be used just because I still haven't figured out my power source. I obviously don't want a wire attached to this, so batteries and most likely LEDs are going to be involved. So this fixture right here is really dependent on what I end up putting there, because the sole purpose purpose of this, not just to elevate the bowl, is going to be to hide some sort of battery pack. So the only thing I have left to do on this besides finishing it, and I'm going to be keeping mahogany the way it is, I think I'm going to paint these the color of the team, and is going to be working on the Badger for the top of this. The last big obstacle I have for this trophy is finding a light source, and I showed you some of those LED battery powered strips that I've tried out with other projects, but it just wasn't bright enough for this. So unfortunately you're fairly limited if you don't want cords coming out from any of your projects really. So what I did was, the thing that you're looking for here is lumens, the amount of lumens that comes with your light source. The more lumens, the brighter the light source is going to be, and that led me to look at flashlights because batteries last a little longer in flashlights than those LED power strips anyways. Unfortunately, I'm not a lover of the light quality of that bright, almost bluish kind of stark color quality that comes in most LED lights. I prefer the warm lights of even incandescent style lights, but those are just super hard to find. So I did a little research and found out that a 100-watt bulb is going to be the equivalent of about 1600 lumens, whereas a 40-watt light bulb is going to be the equivalent of about 450 lumens. So when purchasing a flashlight, I just tried to find the one that didn't break the bank and had a ton of lumens in it. So the higher the lumen of the flashlight, the more expensive it is going to be. And I didn't want to spend $60 on a high quality flashlight for this project, but doing some research, the Lowe's near me had this Energizer 1300 lumen LED flashlight on sale. It was originally like 30 bucks down to 20, and it had a very large lumen count and had really good reviews online. So I bought it, and this is the flashlight. And I also bought it because the shaft of the flashlight actually looks like a trophy, which is good because you're most likely, my plan is going to be to run this through the center of the piece up into the ball, so you're going to have an extra piece in there, so you want it to match a little bit. So I'm going to turn off the light and see how well this flashlight illuminates my soccer ball. So that is actually probably the best light I've tried out in here. I actually had a incandescent I put in here that I really liked, and I think this is actually a little brighter than that. So now that I have a light that works, I'm going to start working on figuring out how to mount this into my piece. Also, the access to the battery is going to be in the back, and you want to keep that open so they can change it, and also figuring out how to get it so that this knob can be turned on and off, but still not necessarily obstruct the design of the trophy. I have an 1 3/8 hole saw in my drill press, which should fit. It might be a little bit tight, but I'd rather it be tight and I have to sand the outer rim of that circle a little bit than it be too loose. And I already had center marked on here from when I did the pegs, so I'm just going to drill through this entire piece and then drill through the triangle as well, and that's where that flashlight's going to set. In order to be able to change out the batteries in this flashlight, I'm going to have to make my feet taller so that you can twist off the bottom of this flashlight. And it doesn't stick down far enough now to be able to twist that off. So I'm going to cut these feet flush, re-drill the holes where the current holes are, and then put deeper feet in there. I ended up having to widen that hexagon on the bottom to fit over that light bulb. The original design included this kind of circular, almost mini pedestal the ball sat on, and the reasoning for that was I originally thought I was going to be using LED string lights and this was going to hide the battery pack. But now that I'm using the flashlight, there's really no need for it, and to be perfectly honest, I wasn't in love with the way it looked to start. It doesn't really fit the ball nicely. There's this kind of weird lip right here, and it kind of obstructs the shape of the triangle because it comes all the way to the edge. So after I drilled out that hole for the flashlight, I kind of realized that I didn't need this at all. So the ball could sit right on top of the flashlight. And I probably won't even attach this, especially for shipping reasons. It'll just be too fragile. And if you ever need to change out the flashlight, you could just remove the ball, and it will be something that when it's sitting there, it won't fall off. Once I removed that wooden piece though, the head of the flashlight was just too high up in the ball, and it was shining brighter on the top than the bottom. So I cut these little 1-inch spacers that I'm going to mount on top of my spindles, and that's because someone gave me this spindle dowel probably 5 or 6 years ago, and I couldn't find it in the stores. Now if this was a piece of furniture like a table, I probably wouldn't meld them together this way, but I could glue these together, and once the glue sets, put a dowel between this one, and these are going to be painted so I can patch any roughness that's there and it will be fine. So now the flashlight will sit right on top of that triangle, and the button you could just about see on the side there. So I think if I put a little notch on the bottom of this, the button will be concealed, but you'll still be able to activate it from underneath, because this flashlight actually has like 5 different light settings you can use. So I think I'm going to go ahead and glue these together, and then once that's dry, put a dowel in there, and then start painting these so I could start attaching all of this stuff together. So I thought I was going to have to rig up something kind of special to activate this flashlight, but now that I raised where it's going to be, this button's actually in a perfect spot, because when it's sitting straight up and down, you can't actually see it, but you'll be able to hit the button. So in order to make it easier to depress, I'm going to mark where it is and just carve out that little bit of space so your finger can get up in there and depress that button. So with that little indent in place, that pretty much takes care of the fabrication for this piece. I just have to finish that HoneyBadger for the top, but assembling the main part of it doesn't really affect the HoneyBadger. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start teak oiling these mahogany pieces, and they're going to take probably 3 or 4 coats, and I like to wait like 24 hours in between each. So I'm just going to put some teak oil on this, and obviously I'm going to steer clear of my depressions, because if you get oil in there and then you try and glue something, it's not really going to adhere. So I let these dry all day, and that's the seam, and you can see I sunk a dowel in there just to reinforce that joint. So what I'm going to do now is there's a couple little gaps in that seam, nothing terrible, so I'm going to put a little patch on that, let it dry for a half an hour, and then the color for the team is white and navy blue, so I kind of get a little lucky there. I could spray paint these white and then just do the twist in blue, and that is a perfect nighttime activity because it's a little tedious, but you don't need tools. You just obviously need a paintbrush, and I'm not a huge TV watcher, but I'll usually put it on as white noise, and I'll probably end up painting these tonight, which means I won't really film it, but it's going to be pretty self-explanatory. I'm just going to be painting these white and blue. Those are my finished painted twisted dowels, and this might look super tedious, but honestly, doing something like this in front of the boob tube, you're multitasking and it went really quickly. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to spray these with clear coat, a couple coats, and that is because the mahogany for the rest of the pedestal, the rest of the trophy is going to be left just oil, and I'm going to put a little wax on it, so I'm not going to spray this whole thing at the end. The soccer ball with the lights is also going to be cleared with spray, and I'll have to do that here shortly. But I could just hang these up in my shop and spray them a couple times throughout the day, and then these can be glued into place. And you notice I put a little piece of tape at the top and the bottom so that no paint or clear gets on those, so that when you go to glue them together you have good adhesion. If you put paint and get clear on those, it won't necessarily stick super well. So I'm ready to glue these into my base, and you can see my base. I oiled it 3 times, then put a coat of wax on it. It's nice and shiny. And then these I also painted and put multiple coats of clear on there, and they're ready to be glued in. I'm going to glue one at a time because obviously if you glue them at the same time, the glue will drip down from the top onto your piece. So what I'm going to be using is actually epoxy, and that's because the holes I drilled are a little oversized. So if you fill this up with wood glue, it's just going to take a super long amount of time for that wood glue to fully dry. So I'm going to use epoxy so this sets up quickly and I can start finalizing some other things. I'm going to use the triangle to hold everything in place as it dries. The Lowe's by me started selling this 2-part epoxy in these bottles, and you have to mix it yourself. But this is so much more cost effective than buying the pre-packaged ready-to-mix twin bottles that squirt out. I think both of these were like $10, and you seriously get like 10 times more material. You just have to be a little more conscious of the mixing because it doesn't automatically distribute them for you. But it does come with these little tick marks on the side so that you can kind of gauge how much you're using. I just kind of eyeball the size of the puddles I'm making. So that is the finished trophy. I ended up putting like 4 or 5 coats of satin on here, and I know I said I wasn't going to film a ton of the HoneyBadger being carved. I really didn't film much of it at all, and that is because I ended up going on a road trip right after I started carving this, and the car is a great place, as long as the person who's driving doesn't mind, to kind of whittle and carve stuff. So most of that I actually did in a vehicle, and filming just wasn't going to be an option. But that's kind of the finished HoneyBadger mounted on top of that, and I just mounted that with epoxy. And I could turn the light off and you could kind of see how this is going to light up.